much of who we think we are is shaped through our early life experiences. Today, we'll look at how we can better identify the roles that we slip into automatically as we relate to others. In the previous video, I explored how triggering circumstances, generally in relation to other people, can bring out aspects of ourselves that we potentially prefer not to engage with. And in today's video, we're going to explore that theme a bit further, but in a more general way, looking at how we slip into ways of behaving and relating to others very automatically, but again, perhaps are not aligned with who we would prefer to be. And it's important to start by highlighting what I have in previous videos, is that these patterns that we slip into are not evidence that we are somehow deficient or broken or failing, because the mechanisms that we adopted early in life were very adaptive at certain times, that we needed to feel emotionally safe, that our nervous system attempted to help us to feel emotionally safe by generating certain strategies, ways of being that, or ways of behaving probably more accurately, that provided some sense of emotional safety at the time. Now, as we progress into adulthood, those patterns don't provide the same sense of safety that they previously did, but because they were encoded and embedded at these pivotal early phases of life, and the importance that they, or the important role that they played in keeping us safe, our nervous system and our subconscious finds it very hard to let go of those patterns unless they are specifically addressed. So when we look at ourselves being or perceive ourselves to be immature or childish in the way that we are, or look back at our patterns of behavior and think, why did I do that? Why do I keep slipping into that way around other people? There will generally always be a protective function to why we slip into that pattern of behavior that has its origins from early life. So these roles that we slip into are the nervous system's attempt to keep us connected and emotionally safe. That's all. No failure. Yes, these patterns are not as helpful as they once were, but it is not a sign of you being an ineffective human being. It just points to where some attention perhaps is needed in your own healing or personal growth journey. So let's look at some of the roles that are the more common ones we can slip into. Firstly, there's the caretaker. In a caretaker role, there tends to be a fear of loss of connection to others, and therefore in this role there tends to be a hypervigilance around ensuring the needs of others are met, and a sense of sacrificing one's own needs and wants to ensure that others are looked after, cared for, happy. and a excessive responsibility for there being harmony within interpersonal situations. Now, if that sounds like you, I'd encourage you to see that performed some kind of a adaptive function at some stage in your life. Again, generally somewhere in childhood or early adolescence, but usually dating back to childhood. Then we have the performer. Performers tend to, or the performer role tends to involve seeking validation or approval through being competent and impressive, and there tends to be a strong dislike for any type of failure and a belief that worth is somewhat conditional, that performance is required in order to feel worthy. The underlying belief for someone who tends to slip into a performer role is something along the lines of, I'm not good enough. And therefore the performer role tends to be a compensation for that feeling of not good enough. Then we can go to the avoider. Avoiders tend to feel safer when they reduce closeness to others. So pulling back when emotions are high, focusing a lot more on independence, and feeling overwhelmed when any kind of need is demanded of them. So meeting the needs of another, or even having to meet one's own needs, can be overwhelming for the avoider, or for someone who slips into the avoider role, I should say. Because, as we'll come back to later on, these roles are just temporary. They're not really who you are, but they're very powerful when they take over. Similar but slightly different, we could call out the peacemaker role. So peacemakers, or that role, tends to involve avoiding any kind of rupture within an interpersonal dynamic, any kind of tension in an interaction is generally generating anxiety in the peacemaker, and therefore the peacemaker seeks to soften, and again, in a similar way maybe to the caretaker role, sacrifice their own needs to keep others happy. And then another role that's fairly common is the strong one. So in the strong, or those people that are seen as the strong ones, there tends to be a leaning towards not asking for help, in not showing vulnerability, wanting to hold everyone else together. And this is driven generally by a desire to feel in control and stable. And so, as I touched on a moment ago, none of these roles are actually you. They're not your core essence. They're not who you were when you were born. They were not innate. They were learned out of necessity. And for some of us, those roles became very entrenched and are quite difficult to shift, and need a bit more assistance in order to shift out of those roles or soften up those roles, so that we don't identify as them, as that being who we are, because is not who we are at our essence. As an innocent little baby, probably up until you're at least 2 or even 3, you weren't showing any signs of falling into those roles. They were learnt after that. And so for me personally, I'm happy to share my example, which is the performer. So I have seen myself falling into that role, particularly in my childhood and adolescent years, that I firstly sought to achieve at a high level in primary school, early high school, academically as a way of proving my worth, getting the validation from others, proving that I am good enough. There is also a competitive flavour to me as the performer, and this, I guess, is the sort of darker aspect of being the performer at times, is that if I didn't get the validation, or if I lost at sport, for example, I'd struggle quite a lot when I was younger to deal with losing, because it felt like I hadn't proved my worth and failed. With relationships, I didn't want to put myself out there with females when I was younger due to the fear of failure. I did not want to risk making a move on a girl if I thought there was any chance that I could be rejected or fail. So, I brought in some of that avoiding tendency as a way of ensuring that I'm hopefully staying in an impressive or a more impressive way of being in the world. And this carried through into my adult years. I was quite embarrassed that when I would coach my son's basketball team and it looked like we weren't performing at the level that I expected these teenage boys to perform, that I would become very angry. I would get all anxious and worked up and start to become far more intense than I needed to for a teenage boys basketball game. And I would step away from those games afterwards and think, what am I doing? How did that happen? And I would then go into a state of feeling quite guilty and then seeking to motivate myself that I'm not going to let that happen next time. And it kept happening, particularly when it was a high pressure game. If it was a final or a representative game, then I found it very difficult not to slip into that when the stakes were high, when my arousal levels were activated, physiological arousal levels were activated. I found it hard not to slip into it, no matter how much I'd coached myself previously to not go into that state. And it was only really when I did some more work on myself. I'm constantly talking about the internal family systems model on my videos because I've seen what it's done for me. So I've seen how the model has shifted things for me to the point now where, well, I'd like to be in that situation again now. My son's a bit older. He doesn't need a coach for basketball anymore. So I don't have the opportunity to test myself out on that front, but I've certainly seen in other competitive situations or situations where there's a winner or loser, etc., that since doing the work on these parts of myself, the competitive part, the achiever part, and wounded, vulnerable parts that have sat in behind those aspects of myself that I find it so much easier to not be affected by anything that's competitive. So I have absolute, unshakable belief that we can all soften up these roles within ourselves if we're dedicated to turning inward and doing that inner work. And often that will require a skilled professional to do so, at least to get us started. But yeah, for some of us, we can do that inner work comfortably on our own. So maybe now I can invite you to reflect on your own roles. So perhaps just take a moment now, and you can leave your eyes open, or if you feel like letting them shut, so that you can be more reflective internally, to tune into a role that you tend to slip into. It might be one of the ones that I've listed off already: the caretaker, the performer, the avoider, peacemaker, the strong one. Maybe something else slightly different to those. And just acknowledge that this is a pattern, a role that shows up. But be curious about that pattern or that role. Maybe you're drawn back to certain memories and you can see the pattern in different interactions with different individuals. And just witness that pattern, not trying to analyze or judge or figure it out. In fact, just observe whether you feel it anywhere in your body. And accept those sensations that are there as you identify this pattern in yourself. Feelings in the body may be because there is some resistance, some guilt or some shame around being in this role, or maybe the sensations are just related to remembering how you feel in certain situations, like how you withdraw if there's conflict, or people please if there's conflict. And just honor that. Just acknowledge those sensations and ask yourself, what am I protecting? Perhaps you're protecting a loss of connection, or the risk of failing, the potential that you won't belong, or that you'll be seen as weak, or that you'll be shown up to not have the resources to deal with the situation in an effective way. You don't need to know for sure. It's just opening up to the possibility that you are protecting something deeper and more vulnerable as your reason for slipping into this role. As you sense potentially something vulnerable there underneath, maybe it's hurt or fear or sadness, shame, whatever you get a faint sense of, just send it compassion. It may even help to place your hand on a part of your body where the sensations are sitting, to focus the compassion and the kindness into that area of your being. And know that you have everything you need inside of you to support both the parts of you that are trying to protect and the parts that are also more vulnerable, without anyone else, that you have the capacity to give yourself everything that you need. And if you can't really tune completely into what it is that's sitting underneath the surface, it's a bit more vulnerable, or even exactly what the protective layer is, just acknowledge that there's something there. You don't have to know what. Acknowledge and bring acceptance. Soften up. Feel the body just drop and soften around whatever it is. And you can set the intention to come back and explore it more fully at a later stage. And now start to bring yourself back to the present moment and what's going on in the space around you. Breathe into the now. And if your eyes were shut, open them up again and come back into the space you're in. Now with that exercise, that was intended just to be a little touch on getting access to what's potentially going on underneath the surface for you when it comes to certain roles and vulnerabilities that are associated with those roles. To really get further into those aspects of yourself, as I said earlier, you may need someone to help you specifically guide you in and do that inner work. I also have a resource on my website that is free, that could be handy if you're keen on going a little bit deeper into exploring not just the roles, but what parts of your personality or psyche could be at play when it comes to your patterns, and that can be a beautiful starting point for firstly self-awareness, and then bringing some balance to these parts of yourself. So, in summary, these interpersonal patterns that we slip into, these roles that we slip into, didn't come from nowhere. They were shaped by our early relationships, and they linger because they are aspects of ourselves simply trying to help. When we notice these roles in play with kindness, whether it be as the caretaker, the strong one, the avoider, the performer, or the peacemaker, we open ourselves up to something new, and we can find our way back to our core essence. You are not these roles. You are far more than any role that you take on. At your core, you are unconditional love. That is your essence. That is your truth, and that is what you can find your way back to when the roles fall away, when the parts of you soften up and allow you to let your true essence shine through. Thank you.